Have you ever noticed that many people spend more and more money every year on feed for fish and ducks, but still bring home less food than they expected? I made that same mistake for years because I believed the pond existed only to hold water, and the fish only needed expensive feed from the store. Every season I watched my costs grow while the pond stayed almost empty of real life, and I thought that was simply how it had to be. Then one old neighbor smiled and said that the pond should not work for me alone because the pond can make everything around it work together if I stop fighting nature. That sentence stayed with me for a long time because I realized I had been feeding every animal separately instead of letting them help each other. I am not a scientist, and I have never liked complicated systems. I am just a man who has spent many years working on a small piece of land and trying to make every ruble count. When you get older, you stop chasing fashionable ideas and you begin to value methods that quietly work every day without demanding constant money and attention. That is exactly what happened when I finally understood that a small pond can become the heart of a self-sufficient homestead instead of being just a decoration. Most people make the same mistake right at the beginning because they dig a pond and immediately think about buying bags of feed. Very few people stop and ask what nature would do if nobody came with a bucket every morning. Once I started asking that question, everything slowly changed. The fish began finding more food on their own. The ducks stopped wasting so much grain because they spent half the day searching for natural food in the water. Even the plants that many people remove from the pond became part of the solution instead of becoming a problem. Little by little, I noticed that every living thing was helping another one without asking me for anything. That was the old method I had almost forgotten because people rarely talk about it anymore. Today, I want to show you how I built that simple system step by step without expensive equipment and without turning my yard into a complicated farm. If you stay with me, you will see why one small decision completely changed the way I look at feeding animals and growing food, and the first surprise usually comes much sooner than most people expect. For a long time, I believed the main task was to choose the right kind of fish and the right breed of ducks, but I later discovered that the real secret begins even before the first fish enters the water. Most people rush to fill the pond because they are excited to see movement and they think time is being wasted if the pond stays empty. I did exactly that once, and after a few weeks I realized I had created nothing more than a hole with water instead of a living system. An older man from the next village asked me one simple question. What are your fish going to eat tomorrow if you stop bringing feed? I had no answer because I had never thought about it that way. That was the moment I understood that water itself has to come alive before the animals arrive. I left the pond alone for several weeks and allowed small water plants to appear. I added a few simple floating plants that grow quickly and give tiny living creatures a place to hide. Many people clean every bit of green because they want the water to look perfect, but that is where they make a mistake. Nature does not try to make a pond look like a swimming pool. Nature builds food first and beauty comes later. Soon I noticed insects landing on the surface every day. Small water creatures appeared without my help. Frogs returned on their own and even birds began visiting the pond every morning. I spent almost nothing during that time, yet the pond became richer every single week. Only after I saw that life had settled in did I bring the first fish. They behaved differently than before because they immediately started searching around instead of waiting for feed. That surprised me more than anything. A little later, I allowed the ducks to spend time near the pond every day. Most people think ducks only make a mess, but they actually help much more than many realize. They stir the shallow water with their feet. They eat insects that become too numerous. They leave natural nutrients behind that feed tiny organisms which later become food for fish. It is a quiet cycle that repeats every day without asking for extra work. Very few people build their pond this way because they want fast results. I also wanted fast results once, but patience turned out to be the cheapest investment I have ever made. In the next part, I will show you the simple mistake almost everyone makes when combining fish and ducks, and why fixing that one detail can save both money and disappointment. Every season. The first season I thought everything was finally working, and then I almost ruined it with one decision that looked completely reasonable at the time. I believe the more ducks I kept, the more useful the pond would become. That sounds logical until you actually try it. Within a short time, the water became cloudy and the banks turned muddy because there were simply too many birds for such a small space. Many people make this mistake because they count the number of ducks they want, instead of looking at what the pond can comfortably support. Nature always tells you when there is too much, but only if you pay attention instead of trying to force the result. I reduced the number of ducks and almost immediately the water began to recover. The fish became more active again, and the plant started growing instead of struggling. That taught me something I have never forgotten. A balanced system always produces more food than an overloaded one. Bigger is not always better. Few people talk about that because everyone likes showing large flocks and huge catches, but they rarely show the extra feed bills or the problems that come later. Another old method I learned many years ago was to let part of the pond remain quiet. I stopped disturbing one corner completely. I did not clean it every week, and I did not chase away every insect or frog. At first it looked untidy, but after a while I understood why experienced people always leave nature a little space. That quiet area became a nursery for tiny living creatures that slowly spread through the whole pond. The fish spent hours searching there for natural food. Even the ducks preferred visiting that side because they always found something to eat. My daily feed bucket became smaller without me forcing the animals to eat less. They simply found more on their own. That is real saving because it repeats every day without extra effort. I also noticed that the water plants I once wanted to remove completely were doing important work. Some shaded the water during hot weather. Others became food after I cut and dried them. Nothing was wasted anymore. Every season I spent a little less money and collected a little more food from the same piece of land. That is why I always tell people not to chase complicated systems. Build one healthy cycle first and let it become stronger before adding something new. In the next part, I will share the small habit that changed my pond from a place that needed constant attention into one that quietly supported itself through most of the season, while asking for surprisingly little from me. One habit changed everything for me, and it did not cost a single coin. I stopped looking at the pond only when I needed something from it. Instead, I spent 10 quiet minutes every morning walking around the edge with a cup of tea and simply watching. At first it sounded like wasting time, but those few minutes saved me hours of work later. I began noticing small changes before they became real problems. If the fish stayed deeper than usual, I knew something had changed in the water. If the ducks gathered in one corner every morning, there was usually more natural food there than anywhere else. If certain plants suddenly grew faster, I understood the pond was giving me a signal instead of causing trouble. Most people only react after something goes wrong, but nature always whispers before it starts shouting. That lesson came to me many years ago, and I still follow it today. Another forgotten method was using the plants around the pond instead of treating them as weeds. I allowed grass to grow a little taller in some places and planted simple moisture-loving plants that did not require special care. They attracted insects which later became food for fish and ducks. During hot weather, they also protected the edges from drying out too quickly. Many people try to make every part of the yard perfectly clean, but I learned that a little controlled wild growth often works harder than expensive products from the store. Every season, I cut some of those plants and placed them into the compost pile. A few months later, that compost returned to my vegetable beds and produced stronger crops. Suddenly, the pond was helping the garden without any complicated equipment. The vegetables fed my family. The leftovers went to the ducks. The ducks supported the pond. The pond supported the fish. The fish gave us healthy food. Everything slowly connected into one simple circle. Very few people build their homestead this way because they still think about every animal and every garden bed separately. Once you begin seeing them as one living system, your expenses often begin falling without any dramatic changes. That is exactly what happened in my yard. I was buying fewer bags of feed and carrying fewer buckets every week while harvesting more than before. The surprising part was that the work actually became easier instead of harder, because nature was doing part of it for me. In the next part, I will tell you about one simple addition that many older gardeners overlook completely, even though it can increase the amount of natural food in the pond while reducing daily work even. There was one more addition that completed the whole system for me, and I almost ignored it because it looked too simple to matter. I am talking about water plants that many people throw away as soon as they appear. Years ago, an older gardener stopped me while I was cleaning the pond and asked why I was removing free feed with my own hands. I smiled because I thought he was joking, but he walked to the edge of the pond and pointed at the floating plants. He explained that those plants were doing several jobs at the same time. They shaded the water during hot days. They gave tiny water creatures a safe place to live. They slowly improved the balance of the pond. Some of them could even become useful feed after being collected in moderation. That conversation completely changed how I looked at the water. From that day, I stopped trying to make the pond look perfectly empty. I only removed excess growth when it became too thick, and I always left enough for the pond to stay alive. The results appeared slowly, but they were easy to notice. The fish spent less time waiting near the place where I usually stood with a bucket because they had more natural food available throughout the day. The ducks searched among the plants for insects and small creatures instead of expecting grain every time they saw me. Most people never give the system enough time to reach this point because they expect immediate results. Nature works steadily rather than quickly, and that is why the old methods often survive for generations. Another small habit that helped me was collecting a little pond vegetation from time to time and adding it to the compost together with garden waste. After several months, I had rich compost that went back into the vegetable beds. Stronger vegetables meant more leaves and trimmings. Those leftovers became useful feed for the ducks instead of ending up as waste. Little by little, I noticed that almost nothing on the property was being thrown away anymore. Everything had another purpose somewhere else. That is the kind of saving that does not always appear in your wallet after 1 week, but by the end of the season, it becomes impossible to ignore. You buy less. You waste less. You harvest more. That is exactly what many of us are looking for after 50, because we value stability more than excitement. There is one final lesson that tied everything together for me, and it was not about fish or ducks or plants at all. It was about changing the way I thought about the entire homestead, and that simple change brought the greatest benefit of all. The biggest lesson came when I finally stopped asking how many fish I could raise or how many ducks I could keep. Instead, I started asking whether every part of the homestead was helping another part. That one question changed almost every decision I made. When I planted vegetables, I already knew which leaves and stems would later become feed. When I cleaned the pond, I already knew which plants would go into the compost. When I watched the ducks searching through the shallow water, I no longer saw them as birds that needed feeding all day. I saw them as workers helping the entire system stay healthy. The fish were doing their part as well because a healthy pond always supports far more life than we notice at first glance. Many people think self-sufficiency means working from sunrise until dark every single day. My experience has been very different. A good system reduces unnecessary work because every small piece supports another one. Of course, there are still busy days and there are still problems from time to time. Heavy rain can change the pond. A hot summer can slow everything down. Some seasons are easier than others. That is completely normal. And there is no method that removes every challenge. The difference is that a balanced pond recovers much faster because life inside it is already working together. That is why I no longer panic when something changes. I observe first and act only when it is truly necessary. Very few people have the patience to do that because we are all used to fixing everything immediately. Yet many times the best decision is to give nature a little time before interfering. One forgotten habit that still serves me well is making only one small improvement each season instead of changing everything at once. One year I added more useful water plants. Another year I improved the shallow edge for the ducks. Later, I planted more vegetation around the pond. None of those changes were expensive, but together they completely transformed the property. Today, I spend less money on purchased feed than I once believed possible. At the same time, my family enjoys more fish, more eggs, healthier vegetables, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that much of our food comes from a system that grows stronger with each passing season, instead of becoming more expensive to maintain. In the final part, I will tell you what this simple way of thinking has meant for my daily life after many years, and why I believe almost anyone with a small piece of land can begin moving in the same direction, without rushing or spending. When I look back now, I do not think the pond gave me only fish or the ducks only eggs. The greatest reward was the feeling that my small piece of land had finally started working with me, instead of asking for more money every season. That feeling is difficult to measure, but anyone who has watched prices rise year after year knows exactly what I mean. Every bag of feed that stayed in the store because the pond provided part of the food was money that remained in my pocket. Every basket of vegetables grown with good compost from my own yard reminded me that old methods still have value if we are willing to use them. I did not build a perfect farm, and I never tried to. I simply connected simple things that already belonged together. The pond supported the fish. The fish benefited from healthy water. The ducks searched for natural food instead of depending only on grain. The plants protected the water and became useful again after serving their purpose. The garden received rich compost and gave something back to the ducks. Little by little, the whole property became calmer and easier to manage. If you are just starting, do not feel that you must build everything in one season. Begin with one small pond if you have space. Watch it carefully. Let life appear naturally before trying to control every detail. Add only what the system is ready to support. Most people hurry because they want results next week, but the strongest systems are built one careful step at a time. I can honestly say that after all these years, this has been one of the most useful changes I have ever made on my land, because it continues giving back every season without asking for expensive upgrades or complicated equipment. That is exactly the kind of solution I appreciate now more than ever. It is simple. It saves money. It produces real food. Most importantly, it gives peace of mind because you know your homestead becomes a little stronger each year instead of becoming more expensive to maintain. If this story has given you even one useful idea, then I encourage you to look at your own yard with fresh eyes, because the first step toward a more self-sufficient homestead is often much closer than most people think. And in the next video, I will share another forgotten method that works surprisingly well together with this natural pond system.